He was just 7 years old when he claimed he could hear the voices of angels. At first, the small town rejoiced. A miracle, they said, a blessing. But when the boy began describing things no child should know, and when shadows followed his words, the church was forced to intervene. What began as divine soon twisted into something darker. In this video, we uncover one of the most disturbing and silenced investigations Ed and Lorraine Warren ever faced, an encounter that challenged even their understanding of good and evil. The small town of Maple Grove was the kind of place where doors remained unlocked, and the church bell was more than a symbol. It was a pulse. Nestled among hills and bathed in gentle fog each morning, it was a town untouched by scandal, by mystery, until the boy spoke. His name was Eli, 7 years old, thin as a reed, with dark curls and solemn eyes too deep for a child. He lived with his grandmother, Maria, a devout woman known for leading the choir and praying the rosary daily at 5 a.m. Eli had always been quiet, but kind, polite, and thoughtful in ways other children often forgot. And then, one Sunday morning, he stepped in front of the congregation and said, "I hear them, the angels. They speak your names." The church fell into stunned silence. Father Bennett, a priest with over 30 years of ministry behind him, approached the boy gently. "What do they say, Eli?" The boy smiled, soft and unafraid. "They say you've been forgiven, and that you must stop asking for what's already been given." No one had told Eli that Father Bennett had been wrestling with a confession, a decision he regretted since seminary. The room grew cold. A whisper moved through the pews like wind. The townspeople called it a miracle. Within days, word spread. People came from neighboring counties to witness the boy who spoke with angels. Eli seemed calm, unshaken by the attention. He would speak only when asked, and each time his answers bore weight. A woman asked if her husband, who had died in a car crash, had found peace. Eli looked at her and replied, "He found peace the moment he let go of blame. He doesn't want you to carry it anymore." The woman collapsed in sobs. She had never shared that detail with anyone. Soon, miracles began to follow Eli's words. A statue of St. Michael in the chapel began weeping. The scent of lilies filled the air during his readings. A blind boy claimed to see light when Eli touched his forehead. The town, once quiet, became a haven of pilgrims. But Maria began to worry. She would find Eli awake at night, whispering to unseen guests. Sometimes he'd write on the walls, in a script she didn't recognize. The words shimmered faintly, then faded. He said they were songs, and then the light began to change. What was once luminous became heavy. The scent of lilies turned metallic. The statue of St. Michael, once weeping clear tears, now shed blood. Animals that once gathered calmly at Eli's side began to avoid him. Birds stopped singing near his window. Maria noticed he no longer prayed with her. He simply stared, as if listening to someone else. Eli's eyes began to shift in color. Not entirely, but subtly, hints of gold that pulsed when he was asked about the voices. His laughter disappeared. He no longer smiled. He only answered when asked about the angels. "They're not angels," he said one night. "Not all of them." Father Bennett grew uneasy. He called in the diocese. That same week during Mass, Eli stood abruptly during the homily and recited a passage no one recognized. Later, scholars would trace it to the Book of Enoch, ancient scripture omitted from the canon, describing the fall of celestial beings who corrupted mankind. When asked how he learned it, Eli said, "They showed me." The community's awe turned to fear. Children began having nightmares about winged figures with no faces. Several adults reported sleep paralysis, always accompanied by the feeling of being watched from the corners of their rooms. A family dog turned feral and attacked its owner after barking uncontrollably in front of Eli's house. Maria begged the church for help. The Vatican dispatched 2 investigators under the guise of theologians. They interviewed Eli, tested his responses, and observed his behavior. At first, they remained clinical, professional. But when one of them heard Eli whisper a secret only he had confessed in private, something not even his partner knew, his hands began to tremble. The next morning, They contacted Rome. Maria found a note under Eli's bed that night. It read, in Latin, "Not all who descend were cast out. Some chose to watch." That night, she locked every door and window, and still, when she awoke, Eli was gone. She found him in the backyard, staring up at the stars. "They're singing," he said. "Can't you hear them? They miss what they were." At the edges of the town, the shadows began to move differently. Father Dominic Reyes and Sister Helena Albrecht arrived in Maple Grove under a veil of discretion. Officially, they were theologians conducting a review on modern miracles for the Vatican. Unofficially, they were investigators trained in spiritual discernment, experts in cases where the divine blurred into the unholy. They met Eli in the parish office, a sterile room lit by cold fluorescent lights. He sat quietly, hands folded, eyes on the cross above the door. At first, his answers were simple, even childlike. Yes, he still heard the voices. No, they did not hurt him. Yes, he believed they were angels. But when Father Reyes asked if they had names, Eli's gaze sharpened. "They don't use names like we do," he said. "But I call the loud one Serial. The others just whisper." Reyes froze. Serial. It was a name he had encountered only once. Before, buried deep in the Apocrypha, listed among the Watchers, the fallen angels who took human wives and taught mankind forbidden arts. The boy couldn't have known that. Not unless Sister Helena asked Eli to recite a prayer in Latin. He obeyed. But midway through, his voice shifted, deeper, older. He completed the prayer using a dialect known only to Vatican scholars, the ancient tongue of Aramaic-Latin hybrids once used in early rituals of exorcism. After the session, Reyes pulled Helena aside. "We're not dealing with a possession," he whispered. "This isn't intrusion, it's invitation." Reports from the townspeople continued to worsen. One woman claimed her newborn stopped crying when near Eli, but his heartbeat mirrored the child's for over 2 minutes. A farmer's cows refused to eat, constantly facing the boy's home as if waiting. Lights flickered, clocks froze. The spiritual atmosphere had turned from awe to dread. It was Reyes who reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine answered, the phone personally. The moment Reyes mentioned the boy's name, she dropped the receiver. A vision struck her, a blazing throne descending through clouds, followed by a figure with wings of fire and a face wrapped in veils. Behind it, thousands wept in chains. She agreed to come. When Lorraine arrived, she found Maria sitting on the church steps, rosary clutched so tightly her fingers bled. "He doesn't sleep anymore," Maria whispered. "He just stares at the sky, like he's waiting for them to come down." Lorraine entered the house with caution. She didn't speak to Eli immediately. She walked the rooms, feeling for traces. The presence was overwhelming. Not evil, but something worse. Divine, perhaps, but warped. The walls pulsed with a hum. She couldn't explain. In the boy's bedroom, the crucifix hung upside down, not nailed, but twisted. Then she met Eli. He looked up at her with knowing eyes. "You see them too," he said, and Lorraine trembled, for she did. When Lorraine Warren stepped into Eli's home for the first time, the stillness hit her like a wave. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of anticipation, of something holding its breath. The walls carried no sound, not even the creak of age. The air was too still. Lorraine had walked into haunted houses where furniture moved and screams echoed from behind plaster. But this was worse. This was reverent, as if the house itself awaited something sacred or profane. Eli was seated cross-legged on the floor, arranging smooth black stones in a spiral. Each one bore symbols unfamiliar to Lorraine, though some stirred echoes in her memory. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence. But just as she crossed the threshold of the living room, he spoke without turning. "You've seen them before. You just don't remember." The chill that ran through Lorraine had nothing to do with the autumn wind outside. She had heard that voice before, not in sound, but in dreams, visions. whispers from the edge of sleep where names had no shape and light burned with messages. But never from a child, never like this. That night, after meeting with Father Reyes and reviewing transcripts of Eli's unexplained utterances, some of which matched ancient Enochian texts known only to a few linguists in the world, Lorraine chose to engage in a deep trance state. Alone, in the guest room of Eli's house, she drew a circle of blessed salt, lit consecrated candles, and placed a relic of Saint Benedict at her chest. Her breathing slowed, her pulse dimmed, and then she was pulled. The transition wasn't soft. It was violent, like falling through glass into a world with no sound but overwhelming vibration. Lorraine found herself standing in a colorless space that shifted with her heartbeat. There was no ground, only gravity, and a presence that pressed against her thoughts. In the distance, a great tower of blinding light rose into a sky that bled gold and violet. Around it circled entities with wings not of feathers, but eyes, wheels. Within wheels, a vision pulled straight from the book of Ezekiel. They sang in chords that bent perception, and each note struck something ancient in her soul. At the base of the tower stood a figure, massive, radiant, and terrifyingly still. Its wings were torn, its robes smoldering as if scorched from within. Where its face should have been, there was only brilliance, intolerable, searing. And then it turned toward her and spoke, not in words. In memory, she saw the fall, not of demons, but of angels who refused to abandon humanity. Cast down not for pride, but for compassion. She felt their sorrow, their rage, their mission. Lorraine was shown a garden unspoiled, then a battlefield, where celestial beings clashed with fire and chains. She saw the throne of heaven, vacant, and then she saw Eli, sitting at its base, cradling something between his hands. A voice boomed through her. "He is not our vessel, he is the wound." She woke screaming. Father Reyes and Sister Helena rushed to her side. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin ice cold. She repeated a single phrase again and again. "The light has been torn. The gate is bleeding." Later, once composed, she sat beside Ed and told him everything. "They're not possessing him. They're revealing themselves through him," she whispered. "And they're not here for us. They're here because of something beyond us, something waiting to be rebuilt." Eli approached her that evening as she knelt in prayer. He placed his small hand on her shoulder and said, "They never stopped watching, but now they're speaking louder, because you're the only one who remembers the silence." Lorraine asked him, her voice barely audible, "What do they want, Eli?" He looked up at her with eyes that flickered with unnatural gold. "They want a world that remembers them." And from the hallway mirror, a shadow passed behind them, tall, winged, and burning without flame. It had been 3 nights since Lorraine's vision, and the house had begun to breathe. Not literally, but there were times when the walls pulsed, faintly, like a heart struggling beneath the skin of something long dormant. The smell of ash lingered even when nothing had burned, and the boy, Eli, no longer blinked like a normal child. His eyes remained fixed open longer than they should, as if they feared what dreams might return when shut. Lorraine, Ed, Father Reyes, and Sister Helena had confined themselves to the rectory's library, surrounded by tomes rarely touched since the days of medieval inquisitions. They were not researching exorcisms. Those were rituals of expulsion. What they needed was understanding. This wasn't a case of spiritual intrusion. This was symbiosis. Eli wasn't just channeling a presence. He was becoming a convergence. Point Reyes presented an ancient script unearthed from the Vatican's Black Archive, a forbidden codex known as Thronum Ruptum, the Broken Throne. In it was described a prophecy, a child born under a weeping sky who would become the mouth of the fallen watchers, the angels who did not rebel in pride, but were cast out for loving humanity too much. Lorraine paled. She remembered Eli's words during her trance. "He is the wound." The prophecy went further. It spoke of a war not between heaven and hell, but between silence and remembrance. The silence referred to the throne, abandoned, mute, inaccessible. The remembrance was the knowledge the watchers preserved, hidden within bloodlines, dreams, and children. Eli was one of those children. On the fifth night, Eli stopped eating. He only drank water. He spent hours staring at a fixed point, on the wall where nothing visible existed. When Lorraine touched him, she was hit with flashes of a realm drenched in burning gold. Cities built in impossible geometry, winged figures chanting over an abyss, and a doorway surrounded by names, too sacred to speak. One morning, Eli stood in front of the town church and sang in a voice far older than his own. It was not a song, but a summoning. Each word a key, each note a tear in the veil. Statues cracked, windows shattered, birds dropped from the sky. And then, with unblinking calm, he said, "They're almost here." The town entered full panic. But Eli smiled. Ed Warren had seen darkness dressed in 1,000 disguises, smiling dolls, cursed mirrors, rooms that screamed when no one was inside. But he had never seen a case where the darkness spoke in scripture. For days he had remained the pragmatic pillar beside Lorraine's sensitivity. He prayed, researched, reasoned, but now he doubted, not just the boy, himself. He watched Eli one afternoon from the rectory garden, scribbling in his notebook. The boy was drawing something Ed couldn't make out at first. When he finally approached, he froze. The image was of Lorraine, sleeping. Above her hovered a figure of light and shadow, an angel with a cracked halo. Its hands weren't attacking, they were anointing her. Ed's hands trembled. "Why did you draw this?" Eli replied, without looking up, because they chose her too, long before she ever chose them. It made Ed rethink everything. He spent that night revisiting his own research, combing through demonology texts, apocryphal fragments, and field notes from old cases they had kept private. A pattern emerged, one they hadn't recognized until now. Children born during lunar eclipses, reports of glowing figures with wings not in dreams, but in daylight, words spoken by the possessed that referenced the broken light. They'd seen this before, but they hadn't understood it. Eli's presence wasn't opening a gate. He was the gate, and those who waited on the other side weren't demons in the traditional sense. They were fallen beings, banished, but not evil in intention. They wanted access, not to destroy, to guide. But Ed's instincts screamed. "Why us?" he asked Eli the next day. Eli finally met his gaze. "Because you're known, trusted. If people believe you saw the angels, they'll listen when they return." Ed stepped back. That night, the candles in the rectory bled wax shaped like wings, and Eli, now pale and barely speaking, whispered, "They're almost through. If you've made it this far, thank you. Your presence in this story means everything, but be warned, what you've seen so far is only the surface. The truth behind Eli, behind what he channels, what he unleashes, is something that even Ed and Lorraine Warren hesitated to confront, and in our next chapters, the veil will finally lift. Because the greatest horror isn't what's coming, it's what we've already invited in. The best and the most terrifying parts are still to come. It happened on the seventh night. The hour was just past 3 in the morning, the time theologians and occultists alike refer to as the Devil's Hour, a distortion of the Holy Trinity. It was quiet in the rectory, save for the faint creaks of old wood settling into darkness. But Lorraine Warren was wide awake, her skin prickling, her instincts screaming. Eli had not spoken all day. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't even blinked. He sat cross-legged on the floor of his room, eyes fixed on the crucifix, as if waiting for it to move. Ed had stationed himself in the hallway, Bible in hand, refusing to leave his post. Sister Helena remained in the chapel, praying. Father Reyes had begun fasting. At 3:07 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply, 15 degrees in seconds. Eli began to hum. Lorraine approached the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob. But before she touched it, the door creaked open on its own. What she saw would never leave her. Eli was levitating. His body hovered a foot above the floor, limbs limp, head tilted slightly upward. His eyes were open, but not white, as seen in so many cases. No, they were glowing gold, with tiny pinpricks of light rotating like constellations. And then came the figure. From the corner of the room, slowly emerging from the shadows like smoke taking shape, came a being with wings that shimmered like mirrors. Its body was humanoid, but elongated, radiant and twisted. Its face was wrapped in bands of light and shadow, shifting constantly. A halo cracked like stone hovered above it, spinning unnaturally. It spoke, but not with sound, with presence. Its very being filled the room with a command so powerful, Ed fell to his knees in the hallway. Lorraine could barely breathe. Eli spoke at last. "This is Zerakiel," he said softly, "the one who watches the watchers." The figure turned to Lorraine and extended a hand, not in threat, but invitation. And when Lorraine refused, it bowed. That single act broke every rule of spiritual hierarchy she knew. This was no demon. It was something else, something old. The air turned thick, gravity shifting. The crucifix on the wall spun, then cracked. The stained glass window behind Eli shattered outward, not inward, and in the distance dogs howled. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The figure vanished. Eli fell gently to the ground. His nose bled. He looked at Lorraine and said, "He's the first. More are coming." The following morning, the rectory was silent. The walls had stopped their gentle hum. The air no longer smelled of ash or flowers. But there was no sense of relief, only the kind of stillness that follows the eye of a storm. Ed and Father Reyes prepared the chapel for a ritual, not an exorcism, but a rite of discernment older than any Vatican rite. It was drawn from a scroll, unearthed centuries ago in a desert monastery, containing prayers not to cast out, but to reveal, to strip celestial entities of their false forms and show their true nature. Lorraine anointed the doors. Sister Helena placed sacred icons in each corner. Eli was brought in, weak but alert. He didn't resist. He simply said, "You're not banishing them, you're waking them." The ritual began with the burning of myrrh and the recitation of psalms in multiple languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. As the chants rose, the room grew darker, not from extinguished candles, but from light refusing to enter. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The crucifix bled oil. Then Eli began to scream, not in pain, but in revelation. His voice split into layers, multiple tones, multiple languages. He shouted truths, deep, private truths. Each one cut through the room like a blade. To Sister Helena, "You still love the one who harmed you." To Father Reyes, "You fear you are doing this to be seen, not to save." To Lorraine, "You asked to see God, but you already have." To Ed, "You fight darkness because you see it in yourself." Every person in the room fell to their knees, broken open by words no child should have known. Then Eli's body arched backward, his hands aflame, not with fire, but radiant heat. A blinding light filled the chapel. From within it came not screams, but the sound of chains breaking. When the light faded, Eli collapsed, unconscious. His pulse was steady, his breathing normal. But when Ed leaned in, Eli opened his eyes and said with a calm, not his own, "It's done." Lorraine asked, "What's done?" He smiled faintly. "The gate is open. Now they will choose." To the viewer, "If you're still with us, we thank you from the depths of this journey. You've crossed into the heart of a mystery that goes far, beyond possession, beyond ritual, into the realm of ancient truth and spiritual awakening. And yet, the greatest revelation is still to come, because what waits in the silence that follows is not peace. It's the answer we've never been prepared to face. Stay with us. The final 2 chapters will shake everything you think you know. For 3 days, Eli was gone, not dead, not taken, simply absent. His bed remained untouched. No doors or windows had been opened. Security footage from the rectory showed his last known moment, lying quietly on the chapel pew after the ritual. The next frame showed only an empty space where his body had been. The town spiraled. Panic gripped the congregation. Rumors spread. Some said he had been taken into heaven. Others whispered it was hell. But Lorraine knew neither was true. She had seen it in her dream the night he vanished. A throne not of gold, but obsidian, carved from something older than time. And beneath it, a vast kingdom, silent, infinite, cold. Figures moved within it. Winged, yes, but burdened. They built monuments not to rule, but to remember. On the third day, just before dawn, Eli returned. He walked back into the chapel alone, barefoot, wearing the same clothes he'd vanished in. His skin was pale, eyes sunken, but his posture was different. Not like a child, like a witness. They asked where he had been. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "I saw the place that holds what heaven forgot." It wasn't fire, it was memory. Ed demanded details. Eli described a city without walls, where voices echoed without mouths, where angels stood still, not fallen, but waiting, where time folded, and at the center a figure with no face, who radiated silence. He asked me a question, Eli said. "What was it?" Lorraine whispered. "Do you still believe in us?" The words fell like thunder. Not a threat, a request, a test. The church took him in for evaluation, but refused to comment. Officials came, reviewed files, removed documents. They instructed everyone to cease all discussion. Eli was placed in seclusion for protection. But Lorraine knew the truth. The church wasn't hiding Eli to protect him from the world. They were protecting the world from what he now knew. Months passed. Eli remained under strict observation, though no official reports were released. Publicly, the case was never acknowledged. The Warren files related to it were sealed. Privately, Lorraine made one last entry in her journal. He was never the danger. He was the echo, the question, and we never answered. Lorraine visited him, one last time. The room was sterile, white, cold. Cameras monitored every angle, but Eli greeted her with a smile. His eyes were different now, no longer reflecting visions, but holding them. "Are they still speaking to you?" she asked. "They don't need to," he replied. "They've said enough. Now it's us who must speak." "To who?" "To each other." She pressed further. "Will they return?" Eli looked toward the ceiling, then back at her. "They never left. They've just been waiting for someone to listen without fear." Lorraine held his hand one final time. It was warm, human. But when she turned to leave, she caught her own reflection in the glass. Behind her stood a winged figure, not threatening, simply watching. That night, she sat with Ed by the fire, silent. He didn't press her for answers. He only asked, "Do you believe he's a prophet?" Lorraine shook her head. "No. He's the mirror. We're the ones who must decide what we're seeing." The church never reopened the case. The Vatican issued a formal denial. The town moved on, or pretended to, but Lorraine never did. In her last years, she often spoke about questions without answers, about miracles that come dressed as warnings. She would say, "If heaven is silent, it's not because it has nothing to say, it's because we've stopped listening." Eli's drawings were quietly archived in the Warren Occult Museum. No one dared display them, but one, found years later, showed a massive throne, empty, cracked, weeping light, and a single phrase beneath it: "He will not return until we stop expecting the wrong one." Could it be that we have misunderstood not just demons, but angels? Could it be that the most terrifying messages are not screams from hell, but silence from heaven? Was Eli a messenger or a mirror? Let us know what you believe in the comments. Your voice matters, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the cases they tried to bury. Because in our next video, we'll explore a house so cursed, Ed Warren himself refused to enter it alone. And what he left behind may still be alive. Click now to uncover what even the Warrens feared to face.